Welcome back. Today, we're diving into a topic that's both fascinating and frankly, quite scary, the dark web. You've probably heard about it, that hidden part of the internet often linked with crime. Well, we've collected some truly chilling stories that are reported to be real experiences and crimes originating from the dark web. These aren't your average spooky tales. They touch on the genuine dangers and unsettling events that can happen when anonymity meets criminal intent online. So, grab your headphones, maybe turn down the lights, or perhaps keep them on. Let's get into this clip featuring true dark web scary stories. I'm Josh. Just a regular college kid, 19, trying to navigate the glorious maze that is higher education and the awkward transition into actual adulthood. Most days are a blur of lukewarm coffee, questionable cafeteria food, lectures I half listen to, and the constant low-grade anxiety about student loans and whether I'm actually learning anything useful. But this particular weekend was supposed to be different. A break. A reset button, sort of. My parents decided to visit my aunt and uncle a few states over, a long drive they weren't looking forward to, but insisted they needed. Which meant, for the first time in months, I had the house completely to myself. Now, I know what you might be thinking. House alone. Party time. Not me, though. I'm not exactly a social butterfly, more of a moth drawn to the warm glow of my computer screen. My idea of a wild Friday night involves ordering pizza, binge-watching something questionable, and maybe diving down a few internet rabbit holes. This weekend was shaping up to be peak Josh time. 2 glorious days and nights of uninterrupted solitude, the kind you only truly appreciate after months of dorm life and shared spaces. The house felt quiet. Not in a creepy way, at first. Just empty. The usual hum of the dishwasher, the creak of my dad's favorite armchair when he sits down, my mom's slightly off-key singing from the kitchen, all gone. Replaced by a profound stillness that was initially peaceful. I spent Saturday morning sleeping in way too late, then wandered downstairs in my pajamas, making a truly terrible attempt at cooking breakfast. The afternoon was dedicated to video games, losing myself in a virtual world where the stakes were high but the consequences were just a respawn button. By late afternoon, the novelty of the quiet had started to wear off, replaced by a creeping sense of boredom. I'd exhausted my current game, scrolled through social media until my thumb ached, and even attempted to read a chapter of a textbook. Yeah, boredom was that bad. My phone buzzed occasionally with messages from friends, mostly mundane stuff about their own weekends, reminding me I was opting out of the typical Saturday night college scene. And honestly, I was fine with that. Or so I told myself. The internet became my last frontier. I started clicking on anything that looked vaguely interesting. News articles, conspiracy theories, the mild, fun kind, like whether Bigfoot prefers decaf, forums dedicated to obscure hobbies. I was just killing time, drifting through the digital ocean with no real destination. That's when I saw it. It was on some forum I'd never been on before, linked from a link I couldn't even remember clicking. The page itself was minimalist, almost stark. Black background, white text, no fancy graphics or ads. Just threads with cryptic titles. Most of them looked like typical internet chatter, maybe a bit more technical or niche than I was used to. But one caught my eye. It wasn't a thread title, more like a banner at the top, set apart from everything else. It simply read, curious about what's really out there. True dark web experience. Below it was a single, plain hyperlink. Now, I'd heard of the dark web, of course. Who hasn't? It's the stuff of urban legends and news headlines about hackers and illegal marketplaces. It sounded dangerous, forbidden. And that, I guess, is exactly what made it alluring in that moment of profound boredom. A tiny voice in the back of my head, the one that usually whispers sensible things like maybe don't eat that week old pizza, screamed no. Absolutely not. But the louder voice, the one fueled by lethargy and a misguided sense of digital bravado, was far more persuasive. It said, "Come on, Josh. It's probably nothing. Just some fake link, a prank. Or maybe it's actually interesting. A real glimpse behind the curtain." I hovered my mouse cursor over the link. My heart rate picked up a little. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, peering into something unknown. There was a weird mix of fear and excitement bubbling in my stomach. What if it was something real? What would I see? Would it be terrifying? Illegal? Or just boring? The thought of it just being a dud, a disappointment after all this internal debate, was almost enough to make me click just to end the suspense. I hesitated for another few seconds, my finger poised over the left mouse button. I took a deep breath. "Okay," I muttered to the empty room. "Let's see." And I clicked. Nothing happened immediately. The page just sat there. No dramatic swirling vortex, no sirens going off on my computer. I felt a pang of something akin to disappointment. See? I thought. Just a fake. I was about to close the browser tab when it happened. My webcam light flickered on. It wasn't a bright, steady light like when I intentionally use it for a video call. It was a quick, almost imperceptible flicker, just enough to catch my eye in the dim light of my room. I froze. My hand jerked back from the mouse. I hadn't opened any camera app. I hadn't gone to any website that would normally request access to my camera. In fact, I rarely used the built-in webcam on my laptop. I had an external one I preferred for actual calls. The built-in one was usually ignored, a dormant eye on my screen bezel. But its little green indicator light was definitely, undeniably, on. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe a background process? An update? But none of that made sense. Updates usually notify you. Background processes don't just randomly activate your hardware. The only thing that had changed in the last minute was clicking that link. A cold knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a dud link. Something was happening. I stared at the screen, then at the tiny green light. It stayed on, a silent, accusatory stare. My room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. The quiet house was no longer peaceful. It was unnervingly still, like the world outside had paused, leaving me exposed. Then, a message appeared on my screen. It didn't pop up in a new window or a browser tab. It was different. It looked like it was burned onto the display itself. The letters weren't part of an application or a web page. They were superimposed over everything, stark white against the desktop image, flickering slightly as if struggling to maintain their form. They seemed to radiate a faint, unsettling glow. The message was short. Horrifically short. Enjoy your solitude, Josh. We're watching. My blood ran cold. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, terrifying silence of the house. They knew my name. They knew I was alone. We're watching. The words hung in the air, not just on the screen, but seemingly echoing in the room and my head. The webcam light felt like an eye, an actual eye staring at me, seeing my panic, my fear. The solitude I had craved just hours ago had been twisted into something sinister, something isolating and vulnerable. I wasn't alone anymore. I was being watched. My hands started to tremble. I wanted to slam my laptop shut, rip out the power cord, throw it out the window. But I was frozen, unable to move, my eyes glued to the horrifying message and the glowing green dot on my webcam. Who was watching? What did they want? And how did they know my name? The questions swirled in my head, each one more terrifying than the last. This wasn't a game. This wasn't a digital prank. This was real. And it had started the moment I clicked that damn link. My quiet weekend home alone had just become a nightmare. And I had a sickening feeling it was just beginning. I stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, staring at the message, at the light, listening to the sound of my own ragged breathing. The silence of the house was now filled with the phantom whispers of being observed. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every creak of the old house seemed like a footstep. I was trapped in my own home, the watcher and the watched, and the terrifying reality was that they had initiated contact. They had announced their presence, and I had no idea what they were planning to do next. My mind flashed back to the forum, the link, the nonchalant way it had been presented. A true dark web experience. Was this it? Was this what lay beyond the normal internet? Not just illegal goods or shady services, but surveillance? Terror? A direct invasion of your private space? The sheer audacity of it, the way they just broadcasted their intrusion, was almost as horrifying as the intrusion itself. They weren't hiding. They wanted me to know they were there. They wanted me to be scared. And I was. More scared than I had ever been in my life. The kind of fear that paralyzes you, that makes your body feel heavy and disconnected. I was a college kid, alone in his house, and some unknown entity from the darkest corners of the internet had just informed me they were watching me through my own device. The feeling of violation was immense, but it was overshadowed by the primal terror of being hunted, or perhaps toyed with. They had chosen me. Why? What was I to them? Just a random target? Or was there something more? The possibilities were endless and uniformly terrifying. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my quiet weekend was over. Something dark had just entered my life, and I had invited it in with a single click. The glow of the webcam light felt like a brand, marking me as seen, as known. And the message on the screen was a promise. A terrifying, chilling promise. They were watching, and I had absolutely no idea what to do about it. Panic set in like a tidal wave, washing away any semblance of calm I had moments before. My first instinct was primal. Shut it down. Kill the machine that was betraying me. My trembling hands fumbled for the edge of the laptop, aiming for the power button. but my fingers wouldn't obey. They hovered inches away, frozen by a fear so intense it felt physical. It wasn't just a fear of the unknown watchers, it was a fear of what might happen if I tried to break the connection. Would shutting it down just make them angry? Would it trigger something worse? The uncertainty was paralyzing. I forced myself to take another shaky breath, trying to think logically through the haze of terror. Okay, webcam. The light is on. That means it's active, transmitting. But transmitting what? Just a video feed of me sitting here like a stunned deer? And that message burned onto the screen? How is that even possible? It defied everything I knew about computers. It wasn't an image file, wasn't a text document. It was just there, superimposed, a malignant watermark. My eyes darted from the screen to the webcam light, then around the room, searching for something, anything, that felt wrong, felt watched. The familiar objects of my bedroom, the posters on the wall, the piles of clothes, the overflowing bookshelf, suddenly felt alien, static witnesses to my violation. The silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. Finally, I managed to move. Not to shut the laptop, but to try and interact with the terrifying message. I reached out a trembling finger and tried to touch the white letters on the screen, half expecting them to be raised, physical. Of course, they weren't. My finger passed over the glass, the letters remaining stubbornly in place, unwavering. It was digital, yet it felt more real than anything else in the room. I tried clicking around the message. Nothing. No context menu, no way to select the text, no indication that it was part of an application I could close or minimize. It was like a ghost in the machine, layered over the operating system itself. It was paramount, dominant. My desktop icons were still visible underneath, functioning normally, but the message was front and center, an inescapable truth. Then, I tried moving the mouse cursor over the message. It didn't change, didn't offer a tooltip or a pointer change. It just remained the standard arrow, impotently gliding over the chilling words. I dragged the cursor across the screen, trying to select the text, maybe copy it. Nothing. It was untouchable, unselectable. It was purely a display, a declaration. Next, I tried minimizing all my open windows. The browser, where I had clicked the link, disappeared into the taskbar. My game launcher went away. My desktop was clear, just the wallpaper and the icons. But the message stayed. It wasn't tied to any specific program. It was rooted deeper, somewhere I couldn't access. That's when the true depth of the intrusion hit me. This wasn't just a malicious script running in a browser. This felt like something that had bypassed the usual digital defenses, something that had wormed its way into the core of my system, maybe even lower. My mind went to malware, viruses. Should I run an antivirus scan? But how effective would that be against something that could do this? And how would I even initiate a scan with that message blinding part of my screen and my webcam still glowing, staring? I thought about disconnecting the internet. If they were watching, presumably they needed a connection. I could just pull the Ethernet cable or turn off the Wi-Fi. But the message wasn't fluctuating, wasn't showing any signs of connection issues. And the webcam light was steady. What if they had already downloaded something? What if the link was just a door, and they were already inside? Disconnecting might just cut off my ability to research, to get help. It might leave me even more isolated. I looked at the webcam again. The tiny green light. It felt like a physical connection between their world and mine. My gaze lingered on it, and I had the unsettling sensation that whatever was on the other side wasn't just passively receiving a feed. It felt like it was seeing me, processing my reactions, perhaps even reacting in turn. Was someone or something watching me in real time? A live audience to my terror? As if in response to my morbid thought, the text on the screen flickered more intensely this time. It didn't change, the words remained the same, but the flickering increased, becoming more erratic, almost aggressive. It was like the message itself was alive, agitated. My breath hitched in my throat. Then, slowly, subtly, things in the room started to feel off. It began with the sound, or rather, the lack of it. The usual background hum of the house, the refrigerator downstairs, the faint traffic noise from outside, the distant chirping of crickets seemed to fade, replaced by an absolute, unnatural silence. It was the kind of silence that presses on your eardrums, that makes you feel like you're underwater. My own breathing sounded impossibly loud in this void. Then, the shadows seemed to deepen. I hadn't turned on the main light in my room, relying on the soft glow of my monitor and a desk lamp. But now, the corners of the room seemed to recede into impenetrable darkness. Shapes in the periphery seemed to shift just at the edge of my vision. I'd whip my head around, but there would be nothing there, just the familiar, static objects, now imbued with a sinister potential. My eyes darted nervously, scanning the room, half expecting to see a shape detach itself from the darkness, but also dreading it. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. This wasn't just digital anymore. It felt like it was spilling over, affecting my physical environment, or at least my perception of it. The watchers weren't just in my computer, they were somehow in the house with me, their presence manifesting as this oppressive silence and shifting darkness. The message on the screen flickered again, and this time, the words seemed to stretch slightly, distorting for a fraction of a second before snapping back to their original form. Enjoy your solitude, Josh. We're watching. It was a taunt, a chilling reminder that my isolation wasn't a comfort, but a vulnerability they were exploiting. I gripped the edges of my desk, my knuckles white. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here and be terrorized. My phone. I could call someone. The police. My parents. My friends. Who would even believe me? Yeah, hi. I clicked a link on the dark web and now my computer is haunted and I think someone's watching me and making the room dark. I sounded insane even in my own head. But I had to try. I reached for my phone, which was sitting on the desk near my laptop. As my fingers closed around it, the screen of my laptop flashed. Not the message this time, but the entire display went white for a split second, then returned to normal, the message and my desktop icons reappearing. It was a jarring visual assault, accompanied by a high-pitched whine that seemed to emanate from the laptop itself, a sound that vibrated in my teeth. And then, the message changed. It didn't rewrite itself or scroll. A new line appeared below the first, the same unsettling white characters burned into the display. Calling for help, Josh. Don't bother. We're closer than you think. My hand froze on my phone. They knew. They knew what I was thinking. They weren't just watching, they were reading my mind, anticipating my actions. The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through me, colder and sharper than before. This wasn't just surveillance, it was something far more invasive, something that felt supernatural in its ability to know my intentions. I looked at the webcam light, at the 2 lines of text now on my screen. "Enjoy your solitude, Josh. We're watching. Calling for help, Josh. Don't bother. We're closer than you think." The words were a cage, locking me into my fear, cutting off any avenue of escape or assistance. They were closer than I thought. Where? In the house? Outside? Everywhere? The silence in the room deepened further, if that was even possible. The air felt heavy, thick with an unseen presence. The shadows seemed to writhe at the edges of my vision. I wasn't alone. They were here. With me. In the house. The solitude I had welcomed had turned into the ultimate trap, and the watchers were now sharing it with me. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe too loudly. Every cell in my body screamed at me to run, to hide, but I was rooted to the spot, exposed and vulnerable, waiting for whatever came next. The webcam light, that single point of glowing green, felt like a predator's eye in the dark, and I was its prey. My weekend alone was officially over. The true horror had just begun its chilling unfold. I was being hunted in my own home, and they wanted me to know it. I stared at the screen, at the terrifying message, at the unwavering green light. My world had shrunk to this room, this computer, and the unseen entities that had invaded both. The night stretched ahead, long and dark, and I had a dreadful certainty that it would bring more than just silence and shadows. It would bring them closer. The silence, thick and absolute, was broken by a sound I couldn't immediately identify. It was faint at first, a soft, rhythmic scrape, coming from downstairs. My blood ran colder, somehow, than it already was. "We're closer than you think." The words echoed in my mind, intertwining with the chilling sound from below. It wasn't my imagination. They weren't just in my computer, not just influencing my perception of the room. They were physically here. I strained my ears, every nerve ending screaming at me to stay still, to be quiet. The scraping continued, slow and deliberate. It sounded like something being dragged across the hardwood floor in the living room, heavy and unwieldy. Scrape, scrape. The sound rose and fell with agonizing slowness, making its way towards the stairs. My eyes darted to my bedroom door. It was closed, thank God. But it felt flimsy, utterly inadequate as a barrier against whatever was making that sound. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Every muscle in my body was tensed, ready to bolt, but where would I go? Out the window? And then what? Run through the neighborhood screaming about digital ghosts and scraping noises? The scraping stopped. The sudden absence of the sound was almost more terrifying than the sound itself. Now there was only the oppressive silence again, punctuated by my own ragged breathing. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Had it stopped? Or was it just waiting? Then I heard it. A faint creak from the first step of the stairs. Then another. Slow, heavy footsteps ascending the staircase. Creak, creak. They weren't trying to be quiet. They wanted me to hear them. They wanted me to know they were coming. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, a desperate, futile attempt to block it out, to make it not real. When I opened them, my gaze snapped back to the laptop screen. The webcam light was still on, steady now, no longer flickering. The message was still there. Enjoy your solitude, Josh. We're watching. Calling for help, Josh. Don't bother. We're closer than you think. It felt like a status update, a confirmation of my impending doom. The footsteps continued their slow, relentless climb. Creak, creak. They were halfway up the stairs now. I could picture the layout of the house in my mind, the landing, the short hallway leading to my room. They were getting closer. So much closer. My mind raced, desperate for a solution. The phone was still in my hand, forgotten. What if I just called 911 and left the line open? Let them hear the footsteps, the terror in my voice. But the message had said don't bother. Did they have control over my phone too? Could they cut the call? Or worse, could they somehow use it against me? The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. Silence again. A different kind of silence this time, tense and waiting, just outside my door. I could almost feel a presence on the other side, heavy and expectant. My skin crawled. The air in the room grew colder, prickling on my arms. My gaze was fixed on the door. I could see the faint line of light beneath it. Was I imagining it, or was the air on the other side thicker, darker? I didn't dare move. Didn't dare make a sound. On the laptop screen, the text began to change again. This time, it didn't just add a line. The original words dissolved, melting like burning film, the stark white characters bleeding into each other before reforming into new words. It was slow, agonizing to watch, the process itself sickeningly organic. The new message solidified, line by line. Time's up, Josh. We're here. Look. Just look. 3 chilling letters. Look at what? The screen? The door? Around the room? As the word look finished forming, a single, sharp rap echoed from my bedroom door. Rap. It wasn't a polite knock. It was firm, demanding. It sliced through the silence like a knife. I flinched violently, a choked gasp escaping my lips. My eyes were wide, fixed on the door. My entire body trembled. Another rap. Rap. Closer this time, it seemed. Or maybe that was just my fear distorting things. My eyes darted back to the screen. The webcam light was now pulsing faintly, a soft, rhythmic glow that mirrored the beating of my terrified heart. The words "Time's up, Josh. We're here." Look remained static and menacing. I couldn't take it anymore. The waiting, the silence, the knowledge that they were right outside. My fear gave way to a desperate surge of adrenaline. I scrambled back from the desk, knocking my chair over with a clatter that sounded deafening in the oppressive quiet. My eyes frantically scanned the room for a weapon, anything. A lamp? A textbook? Useless. My gaze landed on the door again. It seemed darker now, the wood grain swirling in unnatural patterns under the faint light from my monitor. Rap. Louder this time. It vibrated through the floor, through my very bones. It felt like whatever was outside was hitting the door with immense force, yet the sound was still just a rap, not a pound or a bang. Controlled. Deliberate. Against my better judgment, against every instinct screaming at me to run, I found myself slowly turning back towards the laptop screen, drawn by the pulsing light of the webcam. The message was still there, but now something else was happening on the screen. Below the words, filling the rest of the display, was static. Not the fuzzy kind you see on an old TV, but sharp, black and white noise that seemed to writhe and shift. And within the static, faint at first, then clearer, I could make out shapes. It was a video feed. Coming from my webcam. It was pointed at me. But that wasn't the horrifying part. The horrifying part was what else was in the frame. Reflected faintly in the lens of the webcam, a dark, distorted shape. And behind me, just visible in the edge of the webcam's wide-angle view, a shadow that was too tall, too angular, standing silently in the corner of my room near the closet. It hadn't just been scraping on the floor. It hadn't just been climbing the stairs. While I was paralyzed by fear, staring at the door, something had entered my room. It was behind me. My blood froze entirely. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My gaze was locked on the screen, on my own terrified face staring back, and the impossible shadow lurking in the background of the feed. The rap came again, from the door. But this time, it wasn't just a rap. It was followed by a low, wet slithering sound from the corner of the room. I didn't scream. I couldn't. No sound would come out. My body was rigid, locked in abject terror. On the screen, the static intensified, the image of my room and the shadow flickering violently. The message changed one last time, the words burning themselves onto the screen with a final, searing intensity. We're not just watching anymore, Josh. And then, the screen went black. The webcam light went out. The scraping and slithering sound stopped. The oppressive silence returned, deeper, heavier than before. But the presence in the room didn't leave. I could feel it, a cold, malevolent weight in the air behind me. I stayed frozen, staring at the now dark screen, the last terrifying message seared into my mind's eye. I didn't dare turn around. I didn't dare look at the corner where I had seen the shadow. My weekend alone was over. My life, as I knew it, was over. I had clicked a link, sought a thrill in the digital abyss, and something had followed me back. It wasn't just watching anymore. It was here. In the dark. With me. And the long, silent night had just begun. I was no longer the watcher. I was just the observed. And the silence held its breath, waiting for the next move, knowing I was trapped. And alone. Truly, utterly alone. My name's Sarah. Just Sarah. Sounds pretty ordinary, right? Like someone who worries about calculus homework and whether or not they'll get asked to the spring dance. Well, maybe that was me, once upon a time. Before everything changed. Before the silence of being home alone twisted into something predatory. Before I decided that curiosity killed the cat was just a tired cliche, not a dire warning. It was a Friday night. Crisp, cool air was finally pushing out the last vestiges of the muggy summer heat, hinting at autumn. My parents had just left, their car pulling out of the driveway with a cheerful honk that felt miles away even before they reached the end of the street. Their silver anniversary trip. 2 whole weeks in Maui. My dad had practically vibrated with excitement for months. My mom, ever the planner, had left me with enough casseroles to feed a small army and a list of emergency contacts longer than my arm. Now, Sarah Bear, Dad had said, pulling me into a hug that smelled faintly of his aftershave in anticipation, you be good. No wild parties, you hear? I'd laughed and promised, already mentally calculating how much uninterrupted Netflix time I was about to have. Freedom. That's what it felt like at first. The house, usually humming with the low background noise of 2 other people, was eerily quiet. A big, empty canvas of possibility. I could eat ice cream for dinner, leave my shoes wherever I wanted, blast my music without headphones. The sheer, unadulterated solitude was a novelty, a little thrill. I spent the first few hours exactly as planned, sprawling on the couch in my pajamas, binging a trashy reality show, and texting my best friend, Chloe, about my newfound liberation. But as the evening wore on, the novelty began to wear thin. The quiet started to feel less like freedom and more like absence. Every creak of the house settling, every distant siren, every rustle of leaves outside the window seemed amplified, sharper. The darkness outside felt heavier, pressing against the window panes. My phone screen, usually a source of endless distraction, felt inadequate against the growing sense of isolation. That's when the other feeling crept in. It wasn't loneliness, not exactly. It was a prickle of something more akin to defiance. Or maybe just plain old, dumb adolescent recklessness. My parents were gone. No rules. No one to tell me no. The internet, usually my playground, suddenly felt too small. I heard the whispers, of course. Everyone had. Stories traded in hushed tones in school hallways, coded conversations online. The dark web. The part of the internet that wasn't indexed by search engines, the place where the real, uncensored stuff allegedly lived. A place of secrets and forbidden knowledge. A place for people who weren't afraid. And in that moment, feeling brave, maybe a little stupid, and undeniably bored, I decided I wanted to be one of those people. I wanted to see what was behind the digital curtain. I knew the basics. You needed Tor. Anonymity was key. Don't click on anything you don't understand. Armed with a potent mix of curiosity and overconfidence, I downloaded the browser, followed a few guides I found on a less than savory forum, and took the plunge. The initial experience wasn't what the urban legends promised. It wasn't a den of iniquity and instant terror. It was slow. Frustratingly slow. And mostly dull. Pages took forever to load, and when they did, they were often just poorly designed forums, strange marketplaces selling things I didn't understand and didn't want to, and conspiracy theory websites that made the ones on the regular internet look tame. I navigated through layers of onion addresses, feeling less like a daring explorer and more like I was trapped in a digital swamp. I was about to give up, to retreat back to the safety of streaming services and social media, when I stumbled upon it. A link on a hidden wiki, the kind that listed other hidden sites, simply labeled feeds. No description, no context. Just that one word. Intrigued, and thinking it might be some kind of pirated TV streams, I clicked. It led to a forum. Unlike the others I'd seen, this one was minimalist, stark. White text on a black background. No fancy graphics, no avatars. Just lists of links, each one labeled with something cryptic. Subject 1, basement. Subject 2, warehouse. And then, lower down, almost lost in the list, Subject 3, home alone. My heart gave a little hitch. Home alone. That felt personal. Too close. It was probably just a coincidence, right? Some generic title for a feed of someone, well, home alone. Maybe a security camera stream? Curiosity, the dangerous kind, won out over the growing unease. I clicked the link for Subject 3, Home Alone. A video player appeared on the screen. It was small, low resolution, but it was a live feed. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust to the gloom. The image was shaky, the lighting poor. It looked like a room. A messy room. There were clothes on the floor, a desk, a computer monitor casting a pale glow. The camera angle was all wrong, positioned high up in a corner, looking down at a strange, oblique angle. It wasn't a typical security camera feed. Those were usually mounted more obviously, or integrated into smart home systems. This felt hidden, secretive. A figure was visible in the feed, sitting at the desk, illuminated by the monitor. Their back was mostly to the camera, hunched over the computer. I couldn't make out any features, but the build, the way their hair fell, it looked familiar. Uncomfortably familiar. I leaned closer to my own screen, squinting. Who was this? Why was this feed here? The questions tumbled through my mind, pushing aside the lingering fear. Was it some kind of weird reality show? A voyeuristic experiment? Then, the figure in the low-resolution feed shifted slightly. Just a small movement, a turn of the head, a subtle adjustment of their posture. The pale light from the monitor caught their face for just a second, illuminating it in the gloom. My breath caught in my throat. The blood drained from my face, leaving my skin feeling icy cold. My heart, which had been beating with a sort of detached curiosity, suddenly hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. It was me. The person in the feed. The figure hunched over the computer in that dimly lit room. It was undeniably, horrifyingly me. The same messy ponytail, the same oversized hoodie I'd been wearing all evening, the same everything. But that wasn't the worst part. As I stared, transfixed in a mixture of terror and disbelief, I noticed something else. The me on the screen was moving slightly differently than I was. There was a minuscule delay. When I blinked, the me on the screen blinked a fraction of a second later. When I shifted in my chair, the me in the feed followed. It was like watching a delayed echo of myself. It was me, sitting right here at my computer, maybe 10 seconds in the past. The implication hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a recording. This wasn't some old video. This was live. Someone was watching me. Right now. In my own house. And they had a camera set up that I hadn't seen. Positioned in a corner, looking down. Where? Where could it be? I frantically scanned the ceiling, the walls, the bookshelves in my room. Nothing. No blinking red lights, no strange devices. Just the familiar clutter of my bedroom. But the feed didn't lie. There I was, frozen on my own screen, living out a moment that had just happened. The mundane act of sitting at my computer, exploring the darkest corners of the internet, was being broadcast to God knows who, on a hidden forum I'd stumbled upon by pure, horrifying chance. Who were the other subjects? Basement? Warehouse? Were they also unaware victims? Were they being watched, their lives turned into macabre entertainment? And why subject 3? Had there been others before me? What had happened to them? The initial fear transformed into a cold, creeping dread that spread through my limbs, making them feel heavy and unresponsive. My mind raced, trying to process the impossible. A camera in my room. A live feed of me. On the dark web. I wanted to scream, to run, to call for help. But the sheer, paralyzing terror held me captive. My eyes were glued to the screen, to the image of myself, a ghost from a few seconds ago, oblivious to the fact that her privacy had been violated in the most absolute, terrifying way. The silence of the house, which I had initially welcomed, now felt like a heavy blanket, muffling any sound I might make, isolating me completely. I was home alone, just as the feed title said. Utterly, terrifyingly alone. And someone, somewhere, was watching my every move. The feed continued to play, a constant, chilling reminder that I was no longer just Sarah, the girl home alone. I was subject 3. I had ventured into the dark web looking for thrills, for something forbidden. And I had found it. But it wasn't a passive experience. I hadn't just observed the darkness. The darkness had reached out and pulled me in. I was the show now. And I had no idea who my audience was or what they wanted. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a drumbeat of pure, unadulterated fear in the suffocating silence of my own home. What was I going to do? How could I even begin to comprehend this? The image on the screen of me sitting there became a mirror reflecting not just my physical appearance, but the horrifying reality I had just stumbled into. I was trapped, exposed, and utterly helpless. My fingers hovered over the mouse, rigid with shock. The me on the screen just sat there, a frozen tableau of my own recent past. The 10-second delay felt like an eternity, a yawning chasm between my current horrifying reality and the blissfully ignorant version of myself I was watching. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw its way up my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to slam the laptop shut, to rip the power cord from the wall, to pretend I had never seen it. But another, morbid part of me, the same part that had led me down this rabbit hole in the first place, kept me rooted to the spot, my eyes wide and fixed on the terrifying reflection of my immediate past. Where was it? Where was the camera? I tore my gaze from the screen and frantically scanned my room again. My bedroom. My sanctuary. Now a stage for some unknown audience. The bookshelves lined with familiar paperbacks, the posters of bands I liked tacked to the walls, the laundry basket overflowing with clothes. It all looked normal. Deceptively normal. I got up slowly, my legs shaky, and did a slow, trembling 360-degree turn, my eyes sweeping over every surface. The ceiling fan, the lamp on my bedside table, the stack of art supplies in the corner, the closed door leading out into the hallway. Nothing seemed out of place. No tiny lens glinting, No unfamiliar wires, no strange devices perched precariously anywhere. Yet, the feed was still there. Unchanging, unwavering. Showing me a slightly delayed version of me, getting up and looking around frantically. The me on the screen was doing exactly what I was doing now. It was like watching a nightmare unfold in real time, except the person the nightmare was happening to was me. I crept towards the corner the feed seemed to be coming from, based on the angle. It was the far corner of my room, near the ceiling, above my dresser. I stood on my tiptoes, peering up. Dust bunnies clung to the molding, a forgotten cobweb stretched lazily from the wall to the ceiling fan blade. Nothing else. No smoke detector that looked a little too large, no weirdly placed air freshener, nothing remotely resembling a camera. It was invisible. Perfectly hidden. A new wave of terror washed over me. If I couldn't find it, that meant whoever put it there was good. Professional, maybe? The thought was even more chilling. This wasn't a prank by a friend, or some random hacker stumbling into an unsecured webcam feed. This was deliberate. Targeted. Hello? I whispered, the sound barely audible in the heavy silence of the house. My voice was hoarse, trembling. I stared up at the empty corner. Was the person watching me right now hearing me? Would they respond? Nothing. The feed continued to play, showing the me from 10 seconds ago whispering, looking up at the corner. It was a silent movie of my own fear. I backed away from the corner, feeling exposed and vulnerable. What did they want? Were they just watching? Or was this just the beginning? The creeps and whispers about the dark web flooded my mind, the truly disturbing stories, the ones I dismissed as urban legends. Was I about to become one of them? My gaze fell back to the screen. The me in the feed had finished looking at the corner and was now slowly walking back towards the desk. I mirrored the movement, a horrifying dance with myself. I sat back down in my chair, my hands shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the desk to steady them. I needed to shut it down. I needed to disconnect. I reached for the mouse, my intention to close the browser window, to sever the horrifying connection. But my hand froze before I touched it. What if closing it made things worse? What if it alerted the person watching that I knew? Would they just leave, defeated? Or would they escalate? The thought of them knowing I was aware of being watched, while they remained unseen, was terrifying. It felt like holding a delicate, poisoned thread. One wrong move and the venom would spread. So, I didn't close it. I just watched. I watched myself on the screen, my past self, sitting back down at the desk, just as I had done moments ago. I watched myself stare at the screen, my face pale, my eyes wide with horror. It was a horrifying, recursive loop. Time seemed to stretch and warp. Every second felt like an hour. I sat there, a prisoner in my own room, watching my own captivity unfold on a 10-second delay. The house felt different now. Every shadow seemed deeper, every creak more sinister. The silence was no longer empty. It felt filled with a presence I couldn't see, but could feel pressing in on me. Was the watcher still in the house? Had they placed the camera and left? Or were they lurking somewhere within these walls, enjoying their macabre little show from just feet away? I forced myself to look away from the screen for a moment, to scan the room again. This time, I wasn't just looking for a camera. I was looking for anything out of the ordinary. Anything that didn't belong. My eyes landed on my bedroom door. It was closed. I always closed it when I was home alone. It made me feel safer. Now, it just felt like a barrier, trapping me inside with my unseen observer. A faint sound from downstairs made me jump. A floorboard creaked. My heart leaped into my throat. Was that the house settling? Or was someone down there? I strained my ears, listening intently. The silence returned, thick and heavy. Just my own ragged breathing filling the void. I looked back at the screen. The me in the feed was now reaching for her phone. My phone. I watched myself pick it up, my fingers fumbling slightly. What was I doing? Was I trying to call someone? Was I trying to text Chloe to tell her what was happening? I couldn't remember doing that just 10 seconds ago. My mind was a blur of panic. On the screen, past me unlocked the phone. My current self watched, a knot of anticipation tightening in my stomach. Who was I calling? Who could I possibly tell about this that wouldn't think I was completely insane? Then, past me froze, her thumb hovering over the screen. Her head tilted slightly, as if listening. Just like I was doing now. Listening to the silence. Waiting for another sound. And then it happened. On the screen, the phone in past me's hand vibrated. A notification appeared. And, 10 seconds later, my own phone, clutched in my trembling hand, vibrated too. I stared at the screen, then down at my own phone, my blood running cold. The same notification. At the exact moment the past me in the feed received it. This wasn't just a camera feed. It was integrated somehow. Connected to my devices. With trembling fingers, I looked at the notification. It was a message. Not a text message, but a notification from the same obscure forum where I had found the feed link. A private message. From a user named Watcher. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the notification, just as past me's thumb had hovered on the screen. Every fiber of my being screamed, "Do not open it." But the same twisted curiosity that had started this whole nightmare compelled me. I had to know. I had to know what Watcher wanted. Swallowing hard, I tapped the notification. The forum page loaded, already open to the private message thread with Watcher. There was only one message. Short. Chilling. Enjoying the show. Subject 3. Don't try to leave. Don't try to call for help. We wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen while your audience is watching. My breath hitched. We? Not just one person? An audience? The words swam before my eyes. Don't try to leave. Don't try to call for help. The explicit threat was clear. They knew I knew. And they were warning me. I looked back at the feed on my laptop screen. Past me was reading the message. Her face, pale and drawn, was a mirror of my own terror. She looked up from the phone, her eyes wide, staring directly into the camera I couldn't see. It felt like she was staring directly at me, the me in the present, a silent scream passing between us across the 10-second divide. The silence in the house felt even more oppressive now. It wasn't just empty, It was expectant, as if the very air was holding its breath, waiting to see what Subject 3 would do next. I was caught in a loop of my own making, a horrifying feedback of past and present, watched by unseen eyes, controlled by an unseen hand. The realization settled deep in my bones, a cold, heavy weight. I wasn't just home alone anymore. I was home, and I was being hunted. I needed to think, but my mind was a chaotic storm of fear. My options felt terrifyingly limited. Run? Where? Who would believe me? Call the police? What would I tell them? There's a live feed of me on the dark web and someone is watching me in my house, but I can't find the camera. They think I was crazy, or it was a prank. And Watcher's message was a clear deterrent. What did unfortunate mean? My gaze drifted back to the feed. Past me was still staring, her face a mask of pure terror. It was a reflection of my current state, amplified by the chilling knowledge that this version of me had just read the same message. We were in this together, the past and present versions of Sarah, trapped in a digital cage constructed by unseen forces. And the audience was waiting for the show to continue. A floorboard creaked again, this time closer. Downstairs. Definitely not the unsettling. This was slow, deliberate. Someone was moving below me. My blood ran ice cold. They were still here. Or they had just arrived. The Watcher, or Watchers, were in the house. With me. Home alone. I swallowed a scream. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. My eyes darted around the room, searching for a weapon, an escape route, anything. But my bedroom, so familiar and safe just hours ago, now felt like a death trap. The silence was broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing and, faintly, the slow, deliberate creak of footsteps on the stairs. They were coming up. On the screen, past me's eyes widened further, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a gasp. She had heard it too. The sound of someone coming up the stairs. The 10-second delay was closing the gap between us, between her awareness and mine, bringing the terror ever closer. The reality of my situation crashed down on me with brutal force. I was trapped, and they were coming. The sound of footsteps on the stairs was slow, deliberate, and growing louder with agonizing certainty. My heart hammered a frantic, irregular beat against my ribs, a desperate drum solo of pure, unadulterated terror. It wasn't the settling of the house. It wasn't my imagination fueled by paranoia. Someone was here. Inside my house. Coming for me. On the laptop screen, the past me mirrored my panic. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the closed bedroom door, her chest heaving with silent fear. She clamped a hand over her mouth, muffling any sound she might have made. I was watching myself experience the same terror, just 10 seconds in the past. The delay, which had felt like a buffer before, now felt like a countdown. 10 seconds until the footsteps I was hearing now reached the door in the feed. 10 seconds until whatever horror awaited me arrived. I scrambled backward from my desk chair, my movements jerky and clumsy. My eyes darted around the room, searching for a weapon, a hiding place, anything. The baseball bat propped in the corner? Too far. The closet? Easy to find. Under the bed? Cliched, and likely useless. Every part of my familiar room suddenly felt foreign and hostile, offering no sanctuary. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. They paused, just outside my door. I froze, every muscle tensed, straining to hear over the deafening rush of blood in my ears. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Were they listening? Were they waiting? Waiting for me to do something? On the screen, past me was still rooted to the spot, staring at the door, her face a mask of horror. Any second now, she would hear what I was hearing. Then, a soft click. The doorknob. My breath hitched. On the screen, past me's eyes widened even further, her head tilting slightly as the sound registered. The delay was closing. The doorknob turned slowly. My bedroom door began to swing inward, inch by agonizing inch. My eyes were glued to the widening gap, my body trembling uncontrollably. What would I see? A masked figure? Multiple figures? The face of a monster? The door opened fully. My gaze shot from the cracking door back to the screen. Past me was watching the door open, her body rigid with fear. The delay was almost gone. Standing in my doorway was no one. Just the dark, empty hallway. My mind reeled. What? But I heard the footsteps. I heard the doorknob turn. I saw the door open. How could there be no one there? And then I saw it. Or rather, I didn't see it. The camera angle on the feed. It wasn't looking directly at the doorway. It was aimed at my desk, where I had been sitting, capturing me in a portion of the room. The doorway was only visible because of the angle, a slice of the hallway framed by the door frame. Whoever was standing there was just outside the camera's view. Or perhaps they were in the blind spot. A cold dread settled over me, heavier than ever before. They were smart. They knew the camera's limitations. They could stand right there, invisible to the digital eye, watching me react. On the screen, past me let out a small, choked whimper. Her gaze was fixed just beyond the frame, into the hallway I could see was empty. But she wasn't reacting to emptiness. She was reacting to a presence that was real, but unseen by the camera broadcasting her fear. "Hello, Subject 3, a voice said. It wasn't loud. It was calm, smooth, and utterly devoid of emotion. It came from the hallway, just beyond the open door. The voice was distorted, perhaps by a modulator, making it impossible to tell the age or gender of the speaker. My blood ran colder. The voice was real. It wasn't in the feed. It was here. Now! On the screen, past me flinched violently, reacting to the voice I had just heard 10 seconds ago. The delay was almost gone. It was like the feed was catching up to my horrific reality, frame by agonizing frame. "We hope you've been enjoying the show," the voice continued, a faint, chilling amusement threading through the distortion. "Your audience has been very engaged." Audience. The message from Watcher had mentioned an audience. It wasn't just one person. They were broadcasting this. My terror. My violation. To strangers on the dark web. The thought was sickening. My gaze flickered back to the screen. Past me was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. She looked utterly broken. And I knew, with a horrifying certainty, that I was just seconds away from feeling exactly that same despair. It's rude not to interact with your audience, Subject 3, the voice said, a hint of impatience now in its tone. They want to see you. They want to hear you. My throat was dry, constricted by fear. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. On the screen, past me raised a trembling hand towards the laptop, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Was she trying to type something? To communicate? To beg? The voice in the hallway made a low sound that might have been a chuckle. Ah, trying to reach out? A brave choice, but futile. As the voice spoke on the screen, past me's hand froze. Her eyes went wide, not with fear this time, but with something else. Confusion, followed by a dawning, sickening realization. My own hand, which had been hovering near the desk, suddenly felt numb. A strange tingling sensation spread from my fingertips up my arm. It wasn't pain, exactly, but a loss of control. I tried to clench my fist, but my fingers wouldn't respond. They stayed rigid, extended towards the desk, just like past me's were doing on the screen. We have certain capabilities, Subject 3, the voice said smoothly. We can interact. With you. With your environment. On the screen, past me's head slowly, unnaturally, turned towards the corner where the camera was hidden. Her eyes, wide and glazed, seemed to be staring directly into the lens. It wasn't a voluntary movement. It was stiff, jerky, like a puppet being controlled by unseen strings. And then, horrifyingly, my own head began to turn. Against my will. My neck felt stiff, resisting for a second, then slowly, inexorably, my gaze was being drawn towards the ceiling corner. Towards the place I couldn't see the camera. Smile for the camera, Subject 3, the voice said. On the screen, past me's lips twitched upwards into a grotesque, unnatural smile. It didn't reach her eyes, which remained wide and terrified. It was a rictus, a horrifying parody of a happy expression. My own facial muscles began to contract, pulling my lips into a similar, unwilling smile. It felt wrong, alien on my face. Beautiful, the voice purred. Our audience will love this. My eyes, now fixed on the corner, started to feel heavy, droopy. On the screen, past me's eyelids were fluttering, her body starting to sway slightly in the chair. A wave of dizziness washed over me. My vision blurred. Time for a little rest now, Subject 3, the voice said, softer this time, almost soothing in a twisted way. You'll need your energy for the next act. Next act? The words echoed in my fading consciousness. What next act? On the screen, past me's eyes closed completely. Her head slumped forward onto her chest. Her body went limp. The horrifying, involuntary smile remained frozen on her face. My own eyelids were too heavy to keep open. The numbness in my limbs spread through my body. I felt myself slumping forward, the edge of the desk pressing into my forehead. The last thing I saw before my vision went black was the laptop screen, showing the still image of past me, slumped unconscious, a horrifying smile etched onto her face. The silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with the unseen presence in the hallway, the knowledge of the audience watching, and the terrifying certainty that my time home alone was over. I had sought the darkness, and it had consumed me. I was no longer Sarah. I was Subject 3. And the show, apparently, was far from over. The feed, I knew, was still broadcasting, showing my unconscious form to the hidden corners of the internet. My privacy stripped away, my body controlled, my fear the entertainment. My parents would come home in 2 weeks to an empty house, a cold dinner, and no sign of me. And somewhere, an audience would be waiting for the next episode of Subject 3, Home Alone. The thought was the last, horrifying thing that echoed in my mind before unconsciousness claimed me entirely. I was trapped, not just in my house, but in a nightmare broadcast to the world, with no escape in sight. My name is Mike, I'm 17, and until a few nights ago, I thought the scariest thing about my life was failing my math test, or maybe the weird smell that sometimes wafts from the storm drain down the street. Boy, was I wrong. My folks decided they needed a little getaway, bless their hearts. My grandma, bless her heart too, had a bit of a fall, nothing serious thankfully, but serious enough that my mom insisted they drive downstate for a few days to check on her and help out around the house. That left me home alone, full run of the place. Initially, it felt awesome. Freedom. No nagging about chores, no curfew, not that they enforce a strict one, but still, just me, the fridge, and my computer. The house felt big and quiet in a good way at first, the kind of quiet where you can blast music without headphones or walk around in your underwear if you feel like it. It's a decent house, not huge, 2 stories, in a quiet suburban neighborhood that's usually boringly normal. Tree-lined streets, sprinklers running in the evenings, dogs barking at squirrels, you get the picture. So, day 1 was pretty standard. Slept late, ate cereal for dinner, played video games until my eyes felt sandy. Day 2 was when things started to shift. Boredom started to creep in. The silence wasn't so much freeing anymore as it was just empty. That's when my mind, being the brilliant instrument it is, started wandering into territory it absolutely should not have. I'd been seeing stuff online for a while, you know, on forums and even some mainstream news articles, talk about the dark web. Not just the regular internet you use for browse YouTube or ordering pizza, but the hidden layers, the stuff not indexed by search engines, accessible only through special software like Tor. Most of it, they say, is boring, niche forums, whistleblowers, things like that. But there were always the whispers, the legends, the red rooms. If you haven't heard of them, maybe don't look it up. Ignorance is bliss, trust me. The stories go that red rooms are live streams on the dark web where people pay to watch horrific things. Torture, murder, all real. I always dismissed it as pure urban legend, internet folklore designed to scare people away from looking too deep. Like the Slender Man or the Hook Man. Just stories. Right? But Home Alone, with nothing but time and a growing sense of isolation amplified by the quiet house, that morbid curiosity started scratching at my brain. What if it wasn't just a story? What was actually down there? I told myself I wasn't looking for anything illegal or messed up. I just wanted to see if these places even existed. To prove to myself they were fake, probably. Or maybe just to get a little thrill from peering into the digital abyss from the safety of my bedroom. Stupid, I know. Monumentally, unbelievably stupid. Getting onto the dark web wasn't as hard as some people make it sound, though navigating it was like trying to find your way through a city where all the street signs are in code and half the buildings are traps. After poking around for a while, feeling like I needed a shower just from the sheer grimy atmosphere of the sites I stumbled across, most were just weird forums or marketplaces for God knows what, I found a link mentioned on a ClearNet forum, one of those places where people swap theories about dark web myths that supposedly led to a chat room. Not a red room, mind you, but a place where people who knew about that stuff supposedly hung out and talked. A staging ground, maybe, or just a place for thrill seekers and fantasists. Accessing it felt like stepping through a hidden door. The interface was basic, stark, just white text on a black background. Usernames were cryptic strings of letters and numbers, or deliberately obscure handles. The conversation was fragmented, unsettling. People were talking in hushed tones, using slang I didn't understand, referencing things that made my stomach clench. It felt heavy, like the air in the room was thick with unspoken things. I should have logged off right then. My gut was screaming at me to just close the browser and never think about it again. But the morbid curiosity, that stupid, self-destructive urge, kept me there. I was just observing, I told myself. Just watching. And then, I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was the feeling of absolute anonymity, the disconnect from my real life, or maybe just a teenage need to feel important or interesting for a second, but I typed something. Something incredibly, irrevocably stupid. I wrote, "Hey, anyone else just kicking it? Home alone this week, full house to myself, feels pretty wild, lol." God. Just reading that back makes me sick. Why would I announce that? To a bunch of strangers on the goddamn dark web? People talking in hushed tones about things that belong in nightmares? It was a pure, unadulterated moment of idiocy. A peacocking display of vulnerability in the worst possible place. The response wasn't immediate, not in the public chat anyway. There were a few generic, dismissive comments, the kind you get anywhere online. I started to relax, thinking I'd gotten away with being a moron. Maybe these guys were just posers, not the real deal. Maybe the whole room was just role-playing. Then, a private message popped up. The user had a handle that sent a shiver down my spine the moment I saw it. It was something like Shadow Dweller or Night Stalker, one of those generic creepy names, but in this context, after where I was and what I'd said, it felt specific. Personal. I hesitated for a long moment, staring at the notification. My heart was starting to thump a little faster. This was it, I thought. Someone was going to try and scam me, or send me a virus, or just tell me to screw off. Probably deserved it. Curiosity, the same stupid force that got me here, won out. I clicked on the private message. There was only one line. No greeting, no context, just 5 words that froze the blood in my veins. Not for long. Check your basement. My first reaction was confusion. Check your basement. Why would they say that? And then the confusion was replaced by a different thought, a logical one, a fact about my house. We don't have a basement. Our house is built on a concrete slab. No basement, no crawl space even. Just foundation and then dirt. I've lived here my whole life, 17 years. Never once has there been a basement. It was impossible. The message had to be a random taunt, a shot in the dark, maybe based on assumptions about American houses. They didn't know anything about me, about my house. They couldn't. I stared at the message, then at the screen name, then back at the message. Not for long. That part felt like a threat. A very real, very close threat. But the basement part was just wrong. It broke the illusion, made it feel less real, less scary. Just a lame attempt to freak someone out. I almost laughed it off. Almost typed back, "LOL, nice try. We don't have a basement," and closed the window. But I didn't. Because right then, in the absolute silence of the house, a silence that had been comforting just hours before but now felt heavy and watchful, I heard something. It was faint at first. So faint I almost thought it was my imagination, maybe the house settling, or a car passing by, or just the blood rushing in my ears from the sudden spike of adrenaline. It was a sound coming from downstairs. From the direction of the living room, maybe the kitchen. A soft, rhythmic scratching. Not like branches on a window. Not like something outside. This sound was coming from inside the house. And it was coming from downstairs. My eyes darted from the computer screen to the closed door of my bedroom, then to the floor. The scratching continued, a tiny, persistent sound against wood or maybe drywall. It was too deliberate to be random. My mind, struggling to reconcile the impossible message with the undeniable sound, offered up possibilities. A mouse? We get field mice sometimes, though usually in the spring. But this didn't sound like scurrying. This was a focused, scraping noise. Like fingernails. Or something with claws. The message on the screen seemed to glow now, the stark white text against black suddenly sinister, mocking. Check your basement. We don't have a basement. But the sound was definitely coming from below. Not below the house, but below me, on the floor below my bedroom. The faint scratching continued, unwavering. And in that terrifying moment, the reality of my situation, the sheer bone-deep horror of it, slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. I was alone. Completely alone. And someone online, someone from the darkest corners of the internet, knew I was alone. And they had just told me to check for a basement I didn't have. While a sound, a terrifying, impossible scratching sound, was coming from downstairs. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Every hair on my arms stood on end. The quiet house was no longer empty. It felt occupied. Watched. The scratching sound grew slightly louder, more insistent. It wasn't stopping. It was waiting. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that whatever was making that sound, it wasn't a mouse. It wasn't the house settling. It was something else. And it was downstairs. The scratching. It was impossible. But it was real. It wasn't fading. If anything, it seemed to be getting louder, more deliberate, like whatever was making it knew I was listening. My earlier confusion about the basement dissolved, replaced by a cold, heavy dread that settled in my gut. It didn't matter where it was coming from relative to the ground, only that it was coming from downstairs. From inside my house. Every nerve ending felt like it was buzzing. My hands were clammy, and a trickle of sweat ran down my temple. I didn't move. Couldn't move. My eyes were fixed on the floorboards beneath me, as if I could somehow see through them to whatever was making that horrifying sound. The message from Shadow Dweller flashed in my mind again, not for long. Check your basement. It wasn't just a random scare tactic anymore. It felt like a prophecy. Like they knew I was alone. Knew something was about to happen. Knew about the sounds. But how? How could anyone know I'd be home alone? How could they know about a sound happening inside my house the exact moment I read their message? And why the hell did they say basement? The scratching stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise. My ears strained, listening for any further sound. The normal house noises, the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the ticking of the clock in the hallway, the distant drone of a car on the next street, seemed unnaturally loud in the absence of the scraping. Was it gone? Had I imagined it? Had the mouse, or whatever small animal it was, just moved on? A wave of rationalization washed over me. Yeah, that was it. A mouse. Or maybe a squirrel got in somehow. Or maybe the house was just settling and I was spooked because of that creepy message. That had to be it. It was just coincidence. A really, really messed up coincidence, but coincidence nonetheless. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. Then it started again. This time it was louder. Not just a faint scrape, but a distinct clawing sound. Like something was trying to dig its way through the floorboards. Or maybe a wall? It seemed to be coming from the living room now, near the far wall, the one that faced the backyard. Scratch, scratch, scrape, scratch. It was methodical, persistent, and it sounded strong, not like a tiny mouse, more like something larger, something heavy. Panic started to bubble up. My heart was doing jumping jacks against my ribs. My rationalizations evaporated like mist in the sun. This wasn't a house settling. This wasn't a mouse. I slowly, silently pushed my chair back from my desk. My computer screen still glowed, the chat room and the ominous private message a stark, terrifying reminder of how this had started. Shadow Dweller. Who was this person? How were they doing this? Were they even a person? Or were they just online at the right moment and this was some sort of cosmic horror playing out? I needed to see. My brain screamed, don't go downstairs. Call the police. Call your parents. Hide under the bed. But another part of me, a primal, fearful part, needed to know what was making that sound. What if it was just a burglar? As terrifying as that was, it was a known fear. A person I could potentially deal with, or hide from, or explain to the police. What if it was something else? Something that clawed at the walls from the inside? I crept towards my bedroom door, moving as quietly as possible. Each step on the floorboards above the sound felt like a thunderclap. I held my breath, listening. The clawing continued, a relentless, disturbing rhythm. It was definitely coming from the living room, near the back wall. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. It felt cold against my hot, sweaty palm. I slowly, painstakingly, turned it. The click sounded deafening. I eased the door open a crack, peering out into the dimly lit hallway. Shadows danced in the corners, created by the faint light filtering in from the street lamps outside and the glow from my computer screen. The owls felt different now. Every shadow seemed deeper, every creak of the floorboards felt menacing. The clawing continued, a grim soundtrack to my fear. I took a step out into the hallway, then another, moving towards the top of the stairs. The sound got louder with every step. It was undeniable now. Powerful. And it didn't sound like wood on wood, or claws on drywall. It sounded wetter somehow. Like claws on damp earth. Or something organic. I reached the top of the stairs, peering down into the dark abyss of the ground floor. The living room was off to the left. I could just make out the shapes of the furniture in the gloom. The clawing seemed to be coming from the far corner, the one near the sliding glass door that led to the backyard patio. But it didn't sound like it was coming from outside that wall. It sounded like it was coming from inside the wall. Or maybe from below the floor in that specific spot. But that was impossible. Concrete slab. No basement. My legs felt like jelly, but some twisted part of my mind urged me forward. I started to descend the stairs, taking them one agonizingly slow step at a time. Each creak of the old wooden stairs felt like a betrayal, announcing my presence to whatever was down there. The clawing seemed to pause for a second after each loud creak, and then resume, faster, more agitated, as if whatever it was knew I was coming down. Scratch, scratch, scrape, scratch. It was faster now. More frantic. Halfway down the stairs, I stopped, rooted to the spot by sheer terror. The sound was loud now. Too loud. It wasn't just scratching. There was a wet, tearing sound mixed in. And a low, guttural something. Not a growl, not a whimper. Something in between. Something that sounded like effort. Strained, desperate effort. My eyes were wide open, trying to pierce the darkness of the living room. I could see the outline of the sofa, the coffee table. The sound was definitely coming from that back corner. And it was getting closer to the middle of the room? No, that didn't make sense. It sounded like it was coming up. Up from below. But we didn't have a basement. We didn't have a basement. We didn't have a basement. I repeated the words like a mantra in my head, trying to push back against the rising tide of pure, unadulterated horror. The impossible could not be happening. This had to be a nightmare. Then I saw it. In the darkest corner of the living room, near the back wall, where the frantic clawing and tearing sounds were loudest, the shadows seemed to deepen further. And then, slowly, impossibly, the wooden floorboards moved. They didn't just creak. They bowed inward slightly, protesting under pressure from beneath. The clawing intensified right at that spot. Splinters of wood started to fly up in the air. A dark, damp patch appeared on the floorboards, spreading outwards. It wasn't water. It looked like wet earth. Or something darker. My breath hitched in my throat. The guttural sound from below grew louder, more distinct. It sounded like something heavy breathing, straining, working its way up. The floorboards groaned, the sound of wood cracking adding to the cacophony of the clawing and the wet tearing. A small section of the floor, maybe 2 feet by 3 feet, began to lift upwards. Slowly at first, then faster. It wasn't just bowing anymore, it was being pushed up, from below. And as the section of flooring tilted vertically, exposing a ragged, dark opening beneath, a shape began to emerge. It was dark, covered in what looked like soil and dampness. It was moving. It was large. And it was coming from the impossible basement that wasn't supposed to exist. The scratching stopped abruptly. The only sounds were my own ragged breathing, the frantic pounding of my heart, and the sickening wet scraping as the thing pulled itself up through the hole in my living room floor. My legs finally gave out, and I sank onto the step, unable to look away. The darkness below the floor seemed absolute, a void from which this nightmare was crawling. And the thing emerging from it, it wasn't human. Not entirely. It was hunched, with long, thin limbs covered in that dark, damp stuff. And I could see the glint of something wet and pale, eyes, reflecting the faint light from the hallway. It was here. It was in my house. And Shadow Dweller had known it was coming. My scream was trapped in my throat. A choked, silent gasp that burned my lungs. I didn't fall completely down the stairs, but I crumpled onto the step, limbs tangled, staring with wide, disbelieving eyes at the impossible spectacle unfolding in my living room. The hole in the floor wasn't neat. It was ragged, splinters of wood jutting out like broken teeth around a moth-black, damp earth. And from that maw, the thing pulled itself free. It wasn't tall when fully upright, maybe just under 6 feet, but it was unnaturally lean, almost skeletal, with long, jointed limbs that moved with a disturbing fluidity. Its skin looked gray and slick with moisture, clinging to visible bone structure beneath. It was covered in clumps of dark soil, as if it had just burrowed its way through the earth to get here. Its head was disproportionately large for its thin neck, and its features were indistinct in the gloom, except for the 2 points of light I had seen from the stairs. Now, fully in the faint ambient light, I could see they were eyes. Large, round, and reflective, like a cat's in headlights, except they were pale, milky white, with no visible pupils or irises. They seemed to scan the room, movements jerky and unnatural. A low, wet sound, somewhere between a gasp and a wet cough, came from it as it fully exited the hole. It stood there for a moment, hunched over, dripping dark, muddy water onto my clean living room rug. The smell hit me then, a heavy, cloying odor of damp earth, mildew, and something else, something decaying and metallic, like old blood and rust. It was overwhelming, gagging. It slowly straightened, its long limbs uncoiling. It had hands, if you could call them that. Not like human hands. The fingers were elongated, ending in those thick, dark claws that had torn through the floor. There were too many joints in them, allowing them to bend and twist in ways that made my stomach clench. Its milky eyes swept over the room, seemingly oblivious to me frozen on the stairs. It seemed to be looking for something. Or someone. My breath hitched again, silent and painful. Had Shadow Dweller sent it? Was this the not for long they had warned me about? Was this thing the reason they told me to check your basement? Because it was coming from where a basement should have been? The thought was too horrifying to process fully. This couldn't be real. This was something out of the sickest parts of the internet, the kind of urban legend you read about and immediately dismiss. But it was here, standing in my living room, dripping mud onto my rug. Then, slowly, deliberately, its head turned, its milky eyes fixed on me. There was no expression on its face, if it even had a face beneath the mud in strange proportions, but the intensity of those blank eyes was terrifying. It saw me. It knew I was there. It took a step towards the stairs, then another. Each movement was accompanied by the wet, squelching sound of its limbs moving and the faint click of its claws on the wooden floor. It wasn't fast, but it was relentless. Unstoppable. My body finally responded to the primal scream of terror echoing in my mind. Run. Scrabbling backwards on the stairs, I fumbled for my phone in my pocket. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. Dial 911. Call Mom and Dad. Do something. The creature reached the foot of the stairs. It tilted its head, a disturbing, unnatural angle, as if studying me. The clicking of its claws on the first step sent a jolt of pure panic through me. It was starting to climb. Ignoring the pain in my twisted ankle, I scrambled backwards up the stairs, crawling now, desperate to get back to my room, to lock the door, to somehow escape this nightmare. My phone screen was a blur through my tears. 9-1, the numbers swam. The creature was climbing the stairs surprisingly fast for its awkward gait. Its long arms reached out, claws scrabbling against the wood. The scraping sound was back, but closer now, right behind me. I reached the top of the stairs, adrenaline surging through me. I lunged for my bedroom door, slamming it shut behind me and fumbling for the lock. It was a simple turnbolt lock, the kind meant to keep little siblings out, not this. I slammed the bolt home just as something heavy hit the other side of the door with a sickening thud. Thud. Scrape. Thud. It was hitting the door. Testing it. The wood groaned under the impacts. I backed away from the door, heart hammering, eyes darting around my room for another escape route, another place to hide. The window? It was a second-story window, but maybe? Anything was better than waiting for the door to break. Crack. A spider web of cracks appeared in the wood paneling of the door near the lock. The creature was strong. Much stronger than it looked. My phone was clutched in my hand. 911 was finally dialed. I brought it to my ear, my voice a hoarse whisper. Help. Please. Someone's in my house. It's not human. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, a stark contrast to the chaos erupting outside my door. Sir, please stay calm. Can you confirm your address? I rattled off my address, my eyes fixed on the door, which was now visibly bowing inwards. The cracking sounds intensified. Thud. A piece of wood splintered off and fell onto the floor. Sir, can you describe the intruder? The dispatcher asked. It came from the floor. It dug through the floor. It's long, gray, with claws. It's trying to get in. My voice was rising to a frantic scream. From the floor? Sir, are you injured? Are you safe? Do you have a basement? No. We don't have a basement. It just came from under the house. Please, it's going to break the door. Another impact, harder this time. The lock mechanism shrieked in protest, pulling away from the door frame. I knew it wouldn't hold. The dispatcher was trying to get more information, trying to locate me, but her voice was fading as my own terror deafened me. Rip. With a final, tearing sound, the lock gave way. The door didn't just open, it was ripped inward, hanging precariously from one hinge. Standing in the doorway, framed against the dim light of the hallway, was the creature. Covered in dirt and dampness, its milky eyes fixed solely on me. The terrible smell of earth and decay filled my room. It didn't hesitate. It stepped across the threshold, its long, clawed hand reaching out towards me. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember thinking. All I remember is the cold dread that enveloped me, the sight of those pale, blank eyes, and the sickening, wet sound of its approach. The last thing I saw before I dropped my phone was its hand reaching for me, the long, dark claws extended. My phone clattered to the floor, the dispatcher's voice still tinny and questioning from the speaker. And then, silence. The story doesn't end there, of course. Not really. The police came eventually, after the dispatcher lost contact and the neighbors reported strange noises. They found the front door locked from the inside. They found the ripped-up hole in the living room floor, inexplicable and terrifying. They found the mud and the strange smell. They didn't find me. Not in the house, anyway. They searched everywhere. Up and down the street. Nothing. It was like I just vanished. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the wind blows just right, they say you can still hear it. A faint, rhythmic scratching sound. Coming from somewhere below. And if you're ever alone in a quiet house, and you hear a noise that doesn't make sense, and you get that chilling, undeniable feeling that you're not alone, don't look it up online. Don't brag about being by yourself. And for the love of God, don't check your basement. Especially if you don't have one. Because some doors, once opened, can't ever be closed. And some things, once called, will always come looking. And they might just know exactly where to find you. My name is Emily Carter. I guess you could say I'm your average suburban teenager, living in an average house on an average street. Except, right now, things weren't exactly average. My younger brother, Ryan, was off at his friend Jake's house for a sleepover, a rare night of peace from his non-stop energy and questionable taste in video games. My parents, bless their workaholic hearts, were halfway across the country on one of their frequent business trips. That left me, 17 years old and utterly alone in a house that suddenly felt far too big. Most kids would probably throw a party, invite friends over, or just binge-watch Netflix until their eyes bled. Me? I had a different kind of entertainment in mind. I've always been drawn to the darker side of things, not in a morbid, unhealthy way, but with a sort of academic curiosity mixed with a genuine thrill for the unknown. Horror movies? Please, most of them are predictable garbage. Ghost stories? Fun, but rarely truly unsettling. What I craved was something authentic, something that felt real, even if it was just a glimpse into the collective nightmares of strangers. That's what led me down the rabbit hole. I've been exploring the fringes of the internet for a while now, the places not indexed by standard search engines. Not for anything illegal, let me be clear. My interest was purely in finding obscure communities, forgotten websites, and yes, particularly old and creepy horror forums that had long since vanished from the surface web. I used a burner laptop, connected through a convoluted series of proxies and a VPN that claimed to make me practically invisible. I wasn't sure how effective it all was, but it made me feel safer, like I was putting on a digital invisibility cloak before stepping into the shadows. Tonight, fueled by cheap energy drinks and the complete silence of the house, I was going deeper than I usually dared. I navigated through layers of onion routing, the digital equivalent of a labyrinth, following breadcrumbs left on defunct dark web directories and whispers on encrypted chat rooms. It was a frustrating, often fruitless endeavor. Most links led to dead ends, scam sites, or just bizarre, nonsensical pages. But sometimes, just sometimes, you'd stumble upon something different. That night, I hit a jackpot of sorts. After hours of digging, I found a link to a forum that looked ancient. The design was bare bones, black text on a dark gray background, no images, just raw HTML and thread titles. It felt less like a website and more like a digital tombstone. The content was just as archaic, discussions about occult practices, unexplained phenomena, historical mysteries, and a category simply labeled experiences. This was what I was looking for. I clicked on experiences and scrolled through the thread titles. Most were typical forum fare, weird thing my cat did, heard a noise last night, shadow in my room. Mildly interesting, but nothing to write home about. Then I saw a thread title that snagged my attention, The Listener. It didn't have many replies, maybe only 15 or 20, but the title itself was intriguing. The Listener. It sounded ominous, passive yet attentive. I clicked on it, and the first post loaded. It was short, just a few sentences. User, silent_observer date, October 12th, 15 subject, the listener, you hear it when you know you're alone. The subtle shift in air, a floorboard settling upstairs, a whisper of fabric. Things that sound like they should be part of an empty house, but they're not. Not exactly earth-shattering, but it had a certain atmospheric quality. I scrolled down. The next post was from a different user, dated a few weeks later. User, night_crawler date, October 29th, 15 subject, the listener at silent_observer, I know what you mean. Started noticing it after my roommate left for the semester. Like something is just present. Waiting. Another one. User, echoes_and_dark date, November 5th, 15 subject, the listener, it started with sounds. Now. I think it knows my name. Okay, that last one sent a shiver down my spine. It knows my name. How could a sound, a presence, know someone's name? I kept reading, each post adding another layer of unease. People described hearing soft footsteps when no one else was home, feeling a cold breath on their neck in an empty room, hearing their name called out in a barely audible whisper that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The common thread was always that it happened when they were utterly alone. The total silence of their surroundings seemed to amplify the unnatural sounds. I was engrossed, leaning closer to the laptop screen, the faint glow illuminating my face in the dark living room. The house around me was silent, almost unnaturally so. No traffic noise from outside, no hum of appliances, just the soft whir of the laptop fan. My parents had insisted on getting one of those smart speakers a few years ago, one of the popular brands everyone seemed to have. It sat on a shelf across the room, a sleek, cylindrical device with a ring of LEDs that were currently dark. I'd unplugged it months ago after getting annoyed by it randomly activating during conversations. It was just a dust collector now. I was halfway down the thread, reading a particularly unsettling account of someone hearing a child's giggle in their basement when they were the only person in the house when it happened. A sudden, sharp crackle ripped through the silence. It didn't come from the laptop. My eyes snapped up, darting around the dimly lit room. The sound seemed to emanate from the direction of the shelf. From the smart speaker. My heart hammered against my ribs. That was impossible. It was unplugged. I distinctly remembered pulling the plug from the wall socket and wrapping the cord around the base. It had no power. Then, the ring of LEDs on the smart speaker flickered. A soft, pale light pulsed momentarily before fading. And then, a voice. Not the clear, synthesized voice of the smart assistant I was used to hearing. This was different. It was low, gravelly, and sounded wet. Like speaking through a layer of thick, dark liquid. It was barely a whisper, but in the absolute stillness of the house, it was as clear as if someone was standing right beside me, breathing the word directly into my ear. The whisper said, "Emily." My blood ran cold. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a greeting. It was an acknowledgement. A recognition. The voice, that impossible, unplugged voice, knew my name. Just like the user in the thread had written. My gaze was locked on the dark, inert form of the smart speaker. It pulsed with that faint, sickening light again. My hand trembled, hovering over the laptop touchpad. The thread on the dark web forum stared back at me. The listener. Suddenly, the silence of the house didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt occupied. The air felt heavy, thick with a presence I couldn't see but could distinctly feel. It was watching me. Waiting. And it knew who I was. The thrill I usually got from exploring the digital shadows had curdled into pure, unadulterated terror. I wasn't just reading about the dark corners of the internet anymore. I think something from them had just found its way into my living room. The sound of my name, whispered from a dead device, hung in the air like a physical entity. My heart was no longer just hammering. It was a frantic drumbeat against my ribs, a desperate animal trying to claw its way out. My hands were shaking so violently I had to pull them back from the laptop before I knocked it off the coffee table. My eyes were fixed on the smart speaker, this innocuous-looking cylinder that had just proven it was anything but. The faint glow of its LEDs was gone, leaving it a silent, black sentinel on the shelf. Had I imagined it? Was I so deep down this digital rabbit hole, so starved for sleep and human contact, that I was hallucinating? No! The crackle had been real. The flickering light had been real. And the whisper, it had been utterly, terrifyingly real. It wasn't the smooth, pleasant voice of the AI assistant. It was rough, wet, and utterly alien. And it said my name. Emily. Every nerve ending in my body screamed at me to run. To turn off the laptop, to unplug everything, to maybe even get in my car and drive to Jake's house. Parents be damned. But I was frozen, a deer in digital headlights. Part of me, the part that had sought out these dark corners, the part fascinated by the forbidden and the frightening, was morbidly curious. What was this? And how was an unplugged speaker saying anything, let alone my name? Slowly, cautiously, I reached out and grabbed my phone. My first instinct was to text someone, anyone. But who? Ryan would think I was messing with him. My parents would just tell me I was being silly and should get off the computer. My friends, well, how do you explain this to your friends? Hey, guess what? My unplugged smart speaker just whispered my name after I was reading about something called The Listener on a dark web forum. Yeah, they probably call a therapist. Or just laugh. Being alone in the house wasn't just a physical state, it suddenly felt like a state of complete isolation. There was no one I could turn to who would understand, let alone believe me. My gaze drifted back to the laptop screen. The listener thread was still open. The post seemed to pulse with a new, sinister energy. I scrolled down further, my finger trembling on the touchpad. The later posts were even more disturbing. User, whispering_void date, November 11th, 15 subject, the listener, it's not just sounds in the house. Sometimes it sounds like it's coming from inside your head. Or right behind you. User, shadow_play date, November 18th, 15 subject, the listener, be careful what you think about when you're alone. I think it learns. User, no_1_home date, December 2nd, 15 subject, the listener, it started whispering my name last night. Just once. From the corner of the room. User, gone_silent date, December 10th, 15 subject, the listener, don't respond. Whatever you do, don't let it know you hear it. That last post made my blood run cold again. Don't respond. I hadn't responded, not out loud. But I had definitely reacted. My fear, my shock, had it felt that? Had it known I heard it? I scrolled to the end of the thread. The last few posts were cryptic, some just single words like close or here. The final post, dated just a few days before the forum seemed to die off completely, was from the original poster, silent_observer. User, silent_observer date, December 15th, 15 subject, the listener, it doesn't just listen. It waits. And when it knows you're listening back. The post cut off there. The user hadn't posted since. None of the users in that thread had posted since late 2015. The forum itself seemed abandoned shortly after. What had happened to them? Had they simply moved on? Or had something else happened? A new kind of fear began to creep in, colder and more insidious than the initial shock. This wasn't just a weird glitch or a prank. These were other people, years ago, describing experiences eerily similar to what had just happened to me. They had heard the sounds, felt the presence, heard their name whispered. And then they went silent. I forced myself to look away from the screen. The silence of the house now felt charged, expectant. My ears strained, listening. Was that the house settling? Or something else? A faint creak from upstairs. Just the old floorboards, I told myself. But it sounded deliberate. Too heavy to be just wood contracting. It sounded like a slow, careful step. I held my breath, listening harder. Nothing. Just the continued, deafening silence. My eyes darted around the room, scanning the shadows in the corners, the spaces behind the furniture. Was that shadow deeper than it should be? Did something just move in my peripheral vision? My imagination was working overtime, fueled by the disturbing posts I'd read and the impossible event with the smart speaker. I had to get a grip. I stood up abruptly, needing to break the spell of paralysis. My legs felt wobbly. I walked over to the smart speaker. I knelt down and looked behind it, reaching for the power cord. It was there, wrapped neatly around the base, the plug nowhere near the wall socket. It was physically impossible for it to have activated. Unless it didn't need power in the way I understood power. As I was kneeling there, my hand on the inert speaker, I felt it. A distinct chill that had nothing to do with the house's temperature. It started at the base of my spine and spread outwards, like icy water seeping through my veins. And then, a sensation like hot breath just behind my ear. I whipped my head around, scrambling backwards away from the shelf, my heart leaping into my throat. Nothing. Absolutely nothing was there. Just the empty space of the living room. But I had felt it. I had felt the distinct warmth of breath on my skin. It wasn't my own breath. I was holding that. My eyes landed back on the smart speaker. For a split second, I thought I saw the ring of LEDs flicker again, a faint, malevolent red this time, but it was gone before I could be sure. My blood was pounding in my ears now, drowning out the silence, almost drowning out the frantic voice in my head screaming, "Get out!" I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the speaker, or rather, the space around the speaker where I had felt the breath. The house felt different now. Every shadow seemed to stretch and deepen, every normal creak and groan of the old structure seemed laced with intent. I wasn't just alone anymore. I was alone with something. Something that had found me through the dark web, something that knew my name, and something that was now making itself known in ways that defied all logic. It wasn't just listening anymore. I was terrifyingly sure of that. And it knew I was listening back. The next move, I suspected, would be its. The cold breath on my neck was the catalyst. It shattered the fragile illusion that this could be explained away by tiredness, an overactive imagination, or a faulty electronic device. This was real. And it was here, in the house with me. I stumbled back from the smart speaker, my legs tangled beneath me, and fell onto the carpet. My breath hitched in my throat, coming out in ragged gasps. My eyes darted wildly around the room, seeing threats in every patch of darkness. The silence outside was oppressive, amplifying the frantic pounding of my own pulse in my ears. Then the sound started again. It wasn't a loud noise, nothing that would draw attention from the street. It was subtle, insidious. A faint scratching sound, like fingernails on wood, coming from the kitchen. It was followed by a soft thud, as if something light had fallen onto the counter. My body screamed at me to get up, to run to the front door, to call for help. But my limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. My gaze was still fixed on the smart speaker, that dark, silent cylinder. It hadn't made a sound since it whispered my name, but it felt like the epicenter of whatever this was. The scratching moved. It was closer now, just outside the living room door frame. My eyes were glued to the gap between the door and the frame, expecting to see fingers curl around the edge. Nothing appeared, but the scratching continued, slow and deliberate, moving down the wall. And then a new sound. A wet, dragging noise. Like something heavy being pulled across the wooden floor of the hallway. It was slow, methodical, and it was heading towards the living room. My mind flashed back to the description of the voice from the smart speaker. Low, gravelly, wet. Tears were stinging my eyes now, blurring my vision. I squeezed them shut for a second, trying to regain some composure, some semblance of control. When I opened them, the smart speaker's LEDs were lit again. Not the pale white or blue I was used to seeing. This was a sickly, yellowish green light, pulsing with a slow, unnatural rhythm. And the whispering returned. It wasn't coming from the speaker this time. It was everywhere. All around me. Soft, rustling sounds, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, interspersed with barely audible words. I couldn't make them out at first. They were too faint, too numerous, overlapping and conflicting. But as I listened, paralyzed on the floor, individual words began to coalesce from the cacophony. Alone. Listening. Heard. Knows. Your name. They weren't directed at me in a clear sentence, but they swirled around me, confirming my worst fears. It wasn't just a passive listener. It was aware. It was active. And it knew I was the only one here. The dragging sound in the hallway stopped right outside the living room door. The scratching stopped. The house fell into an expectant silence, broken only by the frantic thumping of my own heart and the soft, pulsing glow of the smart speaker. I could feel its presence pressing in on me from the hallway, a thick, suffocating weight. It was just outside the door. Waiting. Listening. I remembered the post on the forum, "Don't respond. Whatever you do, don't let it know you hear it." But I had already failed. I had reacted. I had listened back. And now, it knew. A floorboard creaked in the hallway, right outside the door. It was a loud sound this time, deliberate and heavy. My eyes were glued to the door handle. I expected it to turn. I expected something monstrous to appear. Instead, the handle remained still. But the air in the room grew colder, the kind of cold that felt like it was sucking the warmth not just from the air, but from my very bones. The whispering started again, louder this time, more distinct. It was coming from the hallway, right outside the door. It was a low, guttural sound, like speaking with a mouth full of gravel and stagnant water. It wasn't forming words I recognized in any language. It sounded like a distorted recording played backward, mixed with something scraping against rough stone. But there was an inflection to it, a cadence that felt like searching and knowing. I squeezed my eyes shut again, clamping my hands over my ears, trying to block out the horrific sounds, trying to make myself believe I was dreaming. But the cold was too real, the pressure in the air too heavy, the pulsing green light from the smart speaker visible even through my eyelids. When I opened my eyes, the green light from the speaker flared intensely, illuminating the room in a sickening, unnatural glow. The whispering and scraping sounds in the hallway intensified, surrounding the doorway. It felt like whatever was out there was pressing itself against the door, trying to seep through the cracks. Then, I heard my name again. But it wasn't the soft whisper from before. This was a chorus of voices, layered over the scraping and the guttural sounds, all hissing my name in unison, M-E-L-Y. 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 It wasn't coming from the smart speaker, or the hallway, or anywhere specific. It was coming from the walls, the ceiling, the floor. It was inside the house now. Everywhere. My scream was a choked, pathetic sound that died in my throat. I scrambled backwards across the floor, away from the door, away from the smart speaker, away from the omnipresent sound of my name being whispered by things that shouldn't exist. I hit the far wall, trapped. The green light from the speaker pulsed faster now, mirroring the frantic beat of my heart. The chorus of whispers grew louder, more demanding, closing in. I could feel the cold presence all around me, a suffocating blanket of dread. It wasn't just listening anymore. It was here. And it wanted something. Or maybe it just wanted me to know it was here. The last thing I remember clearly is the green light from the smart speaker suddenly going out, plunging the room back into near total darkness. But the whispering didn't stop. It didn't fade. It just changed. The chorus of my name dissolved back into individual voices, softer now, but closer. And then I felt the breath again. Not just on my neck this time. All over. Cold, wet, and far too close. The laptop was found on the coffee table the next morning by a neighbor who noticed the front door was ajar. The smart speaker was still on the shelf, unplugged. The listener thread was still open on the dark web forum, the last post from silent_observer still cutting off ominously. I wasn't in the house. The doors were locked from the inside. The windows were all shut. There was no sign of forced entry, no sign of a struggle. Just the empty house, the silent speaker, and the laptop displaying a forum thread about sounds in the dark. They say they searched the house top to bottom. Found nothing out of the ordinary. But sometimes, late at night, the neighbor who checks on the place says he can hear things. Soft sounds. Whispering. And sometimes, just maybe, if you listen very carefully when the house is absolutely silent, you can hear a faint, wet voice say a single word, barely audible, coming from the living room. My name's Brandon. I guess that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Not now. But it feels like a good place to start, an anchor point before things got unanchored. I'm 17, technically still a kid, but old enough to be left alone when my parents decide to jet off to some academic conference in Chicago. They're the university types, always buzzing about research papers and grants. This trip had been planned for months, some big annual symposium, and they'd left me with the usual litany of instructions. Don't burn the house down, homework first, absolutely no parties, and the ever-present, slightly patronizing, stay out of trouble, Brandon. They also filled the fridge to bursting, enough food to last a small army, which I guess was their way of compensating for ditching me for 4 days. The first day was fine. I did some homework, played some video games, ordered pizza even though the fridge was overflowing. Standard stuff. It was on the second night, sometime past midnight, that the boredom really started to gnaw at me. The house felt too big, too quiet. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a thunderclap, every rustle of the trees outside like someone whispering just beyond the glass. Being home alone for an extended period always did that to me, turned the familiar into something slightly alien and unnerving. That's when the strict instructions part of their departure notes began to feel less like rules and more like suggestions I was actively encouraged to ignore. Specifically, the implicit instruction to not wander into parts of the internet reserved for people far more reckless, desperate, or disturbed than I considered myself to be. I heard the whispers, of course. Online forums, late-night chats with friends, even some sensationalized news reports. The dark web. A hidden layer beneath the surface, inaccessible through regular browsers, a place where anonymity reigned and anything could supposedly be bought or sold. For a kid who spent most of his life navigating the brightly lit, curated halls of the surface web, it was a forbidden city, shrouded in myth and terrifying possibility. I wasn't looking to buy anything, not really. I didn't have the means or, frankly, the guts. It was pure, unadulterated, morbid curiosity. Like staring into a dark well, wondering just how deep it goes and what might be lurking at the bottom. I knew the basics, enough to know that you needed special software, like Tor, to access it. I'd even downloaded Tor years ago out of some fleeting interest, played around with it for 5 minutes, and then promptly forgotten about it. Now, sitting alone in the silent house, the idea resurfaced, not as a fleeting interest, but as a compelling urge. A way to break the monotony, to feel like I was stepping outside the boundaries of my predictable teenage existence. I dug through old folders on my laptop until I found the Tor browser application. It sat there, a little purple onion icon, looking innocuous yet holding the key to something vast and unknown. My fingers hesitated over the icon for a moment. This felt significant. A line I was about to cross. But the quiet of the house, the oppressive boredom, the thrill of potential transgression, they pushed me forward. I double-clicked the icon. The browser opened slowly, establishing a connection through its network of relays. The standard Tor homepage, a simple white page with a search bar, appeared. It felt anticlimactic. This was it. This was the gateway to the dark underbelly of the internet. I knew searching on the dark web wasn't like searching on Google. You needed specific addresses, .onion links. And I had a vague idea where to start. I remembered hearing about hidden wikis, directories of .onion sites. I spent some time on the surface web, carefully, or what I thought was carefully, searching for reliable links to these wikis using a VPN I also happened to have installed. Even just searching for information about the dark web felt illicit. After a few false starts and dead links, I found one that worked. It was a plain, text-heavy page, a long list of links categorized like a twisted version of the Yellow Pages. It was a lot. Categories I'd only heard whispered about in hushed tones: drugs, weapons, counterfeit goods, forums for ideologies I didn't even want to think about. My initial morbid curiosity started to curdle into something closer to genuine unease. This wasn't a game. I scrolled down, skipping over the obviously illegal and disturbing categories. My heart was thumping a little faster now. This felt real, raw, and dangerous. I wasn't just reading about this stuff, I was in it. And then I saw it. A category I hadn't expected, listed under markets, services. That seemed vague enough, maybe something like freelance work. But given the context of the other categories, the word services here felt different. Tainted. Still, the curiosity, that persistent itch, urged me to click. The services section was smaller than the others, but no less unsettling. Listings for things I couldn't comprehend, things that made my stomach clench. But among them, buried partway down the page, was a listing that stood out, not because it was the most horrific, but because of its sheer, mundane weirdness in this context. The title was simple: Companionship. I paused. Companionship? On a dark web marketplace? What did that even mean here? Prostitution, maybe? But that usually had its own categories, often more explicitly labeled. This felt different. Intrigued, and perhaps a little foolishly thinking it might be something less grim than the surrounding listings, I clicked on it. The page for the companionship service was sparse. No elaborate descriptions, no flashy graphics. Just text. The description was a single, chilling line for the lonely soul at home. My blood ran cold. For the lonely soul at home. It felt like it was speaking directly to me. Sitting alone in my quiet house, feeling the silence press in. It could be a generic phrase, of course, meant to appeal to anyone feeling isolated. But something about it, in this place, felt personal. My eyes scanned the rest of the page. There was a price listed, in some cryptocurrency I didn't recognize, but I barely registered the amount. My gaze was fixed on something else below the description. An uploaded file. A photo. I hesitated before clicking on the image thumbnail. Every instinct screamed at me not to close the browser, shut down the laptop, and pretend I'd never seen this place. But the same morbid curiosity that had brought me here, amplified now by a creeping sense of dread, held me captive. With a trembling finger, I clicked the thumbnail. The image loaded slowly, pixel by agonizing pixel, in the low bandwidth dark web environment. And then it was there. Full size. It was a picture of a house. My house. Not a generic picture pulled from Google Street View. This was a photo taken from the street, clearly. My front yard, the old oak tree by the curb, the slightly peeling paint on the porch railing, details I knew intimately. But it wasn't just a picture of my house. Beneath the photo, there was a small caption, like a timestamp or a note from the uploader. It simply said, "Taken moments ago." My breath hitched in my throat. My hands started to shake violently. Moments ago. That wasn't possible. I hadn't heard anyone outside. I'd been in the house for hours. Who took this? And why is it here, on a dark web marketplace, listed under companionship, with a description that felt like it was aimed directly at me? My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. A prank? Someone I knew? But who? And how would they get a listing here, in this hidden corner of the internet? The sheer technical knowledge required, the anonymity, it didn't fit any of my friends or even acquaintances. The silence of the house no longer felt merely quiet, it felt expectant. Like it was holding its breath. Every shadow seemed deeper, every normal house sound, the refrigerator humming, the house settling, became something sinister. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones, a primal terror that had nothing to do with dark web marketplaces or cryptocurrencies, and everything to do with being watched. Being seen. The photo stared back at me from the screen. My house. My sanctuary. Displayed on a hidden website as part of a service for the lonely soul at home. I was the lonely soul at home. And someone knew it. Someone was outside. Or had been, moments ago. The screen seemed to glow with a malevolent light in the dark room. The little purple onion icon of the Tor browser on my taskbar suddenly looked less like an innocent vegetable and more like a cyclops eye, wide open and staring back into the abyss it had pulled me from. My heart hammered against my ribs like it wanted to escape. The boredom I had felt earlier was a distant, laughable memory. replaced by a pure, crippling fear. I didn't know what companionship meant in this context, and I was terrified of finding out. I needed to get this image off my screen, to close the browser, to sever the connection to this horrifying place. But my hands were shaking too much to move the mouse. My eyes were glued to the photo, the stark, undeniable proof that my exploration of the dark web had just intersected with my reality in the most terrifying way imaginable. Someone was out there, and they knew I was home, alone. This was no longer morbid curiosity. This was survival. But survival from what? And who? The questions swirled in my head, each one more chilling than the last, as I sat frozen in front of the screen, the image of my own home a horrifying invitation on a dark web marketplace. The silence of the house seemed to deepen, pressing in on me, waiting for the companion. My fingers finally managed to move, clumsy and numb. I slammed the laptop shut as if the screen itself was a window into hell that I needed to board up immediately. The sudden darkness of the room, after the horrifying glow of the screen, was somehow worse. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, desperate to escape. Cold sweat beaded on my forehead and trickled down my back. I could hear my own ragged breathing, loud in the oppressive silence. Taken moments ago. The phrase echoed in my skull, a relentless, terrifying mantra. It wasn't a prank. It couldn't be. Who would go to the trouble of accessing the dark web, creating a listing on a marketplace for God knows what kind of services, just for a joke? And how did they get a picture of my house, now? I scrambled backwards from the desk, knocking my chair over with a clatter that sounded deafening. I didn't care. My legs felt weak, like jelly. I needed to check. I needed to see if anyone was outside. Creeping to the nearest window, the large bay window in the living room, I carefully, slowly, parted the blinds just a crack. My eyes scanned the street. The familiar, suburban streetlights cast long, dancing shadows. The neighbor's porch light was on, a small beacon in the darkness. Everything looked normal. Too normal. There were no strange cars, no figures loitering, nothing out of place. Except for the knowledge burned into my mind, someone had been right there, just moments before, taking a picture of my house. Was the timestamp accurate? Could it have been an old picture they just claimed was taken recently? I desperately wanted to believe that. Maybe it was a real listing, but the photo was just a generic suburban house grabbed from somewhere. No, that didn't make sense either. It was undeniably my house. The crack in the pavement by the mailbox, the overgrown bush by the porch steps, details only someone familiar with the place, or someone who had been observing it closely, would capture. And companionship. For the lonely soul at home. It felt too specific. Too directed. My mind was a whirlwind of panic and futile attempts at rationalization. Who could it be? Someone from school? Unlikely. None of my friends were this technically savvy or this creepy. A stranger? But why me? Why my house? Was it random? Or had I been targeted somehow? Had they known my parents were away? The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. Known my parents were away? How? Had they been watching the house? For how long? The idea that I might have been under surveillance without knowing it, going about my normal teenage life while someone lurked in the shadows, was profoundly unsettling. I moved from window to window, peeking through the blinds with painstaking caution, half expecting to see a face pressed against the glass, a figure silhouetted in the yard. But there was nothing. Just the quiet street, the sleeping houses, the rustling leaves in the wind that now sounded suspiciously like footsteps. Every creak of the old house settling became a potential intruder. A branch scraping against the window sounded like someone tapping. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen seemed to grow louder, more menacing, like a predator purring in the dark. My senses were on high alert, interpreting every mundane sound and shadow through the lens of the terror that had just been unleashed. I needed to lock everything. Even though the doors were probably already locked, I needed the reassurance. I crept through the house, flicking on lights as I went, banishing some of the shadows but also potentially revealing my presence further. I checked the front door, the back door, the basement door leading out to the yard. I made sure the deadbolts were thrown, testing them multiple times. I checked every ground floor window, ensuring they were latched. It was a ritual of fear, a futile attempt to build a physical barrier against a threat that felt less like a physical intruder and more like something insidious that had already breached my mental defenses. What about contacting someone? My parents? No way. Not only would I have to admit to being on the dark web, but explaining the photo and the listing, they'd either panic completely or, worse, dismiss it. It's probably just some weird internet thing, Brandon, don't worry. How could they understand the visceral terror of seeing your own home, now, on that kind of site? My friends? They'd freak out, or think I was making it up. Or, and this was a dark thought, maybe one of them was involved. The paranoia was starting to get its hooks in deep. Trust felt like a luxury I couldn't afford right now. I was alone. Truly alone. Just like the description said. For the lonely soul at home. The isolation wasn't just a circumstance of my parents being away anymore. It felt like a trap. I thought about going back to the laptop. Going back to that listing. Maybe there was more information. Maybe I could trace it. But the thought of reopening the Tor browser, of willingly stepping back into that abyss after what it had shown me, made my stomach churn. What if the listing had changed? What if there were other photos? What if I clicked on something worse? No! I couldn't go back there. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I retreated to the living room, pulling the blinds shut on all the windows. It felt safer, but also more confining. I turned on every lamp, flooding the room with light, trying to push back the encroaching darkness, both outside and in my own mind. I sat on the couch, hunched over, listening. Listening to the house, listening to the night. Every distant car sound, every gust of wind, every settling creak of the floorboards was magnified, filtered through my fear. Was that a footstep outside? Was that a hand on the doorknob? My phone lay on the coffee table. A lifeline? Or just another way they could reach me? Could they trace my phone? Had they already? The paranoia was becoming debilitating. I picked up the phone, scrolling aimlessly through contacts, none of whom felt like the right person to call. Who do you call when you find a picture of your house on a dark web companionship listing? There wasn't a category for that in my mental emergency contact list. I thought about the police. But what would I tell them? Hi, I was on the dark web, which is illegal to access for minors, and I found a picture of my house on a creepy website. They'd probably confiscate my laptop, question me for hours, and maybe still not believe the severity of it. It felt like calling them would just create a different kind of problem, and maybe even alert whoever was out there that I knew. So I sat there, in the overlit living room, alone, with the knowledge that somewhere, somehow, someone had seen me, know I was alone, taken a picture of my house, and posted it on a dark web marketplace as an advertisement for something called companionship. The silence of the house felt like a living entity, pressing in on me, waiting. Waiting for what? Waiting for me to make a move? Waiting for something else to happen? I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. That the photo wasn't the end, but a beginning. An announcement. An invitation. An invitation to the lonely soul at home. A shiver ran down my spine, the kind that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was a deep, existential chill, the realization that my private world had been breached by something horrifying and unknowable. The lines between the digital abyss I had foolishly explored and the physical safety of my home had blurred, dissolving into a terrifying reality where I was the target, the product, the lonely soul. I spent the next hour or two just listening, every nerve ending screaming, every muscle tense. I didn't dare look outside again. I just sat there, a single point of light and terror in the dark, silent house, waiting for the next sound, the next sign, the next move from the unseen companion who had just announced their interest. The night felt endless, and the feeling of being watched never went away. It only grew stronger, heavier, a palpable weight in the air around me. The house wasn't my sanctuary anymore. It was a cage, and something was circling outside. Or maybe, just maybe, it was already inside. The hours stretched and twisted, each minute an eternity of strained nerves and hyper-awareness. My eyes ached from staring into the overlit room, searching for something, anything, out of the ordinary. My ears strained to filter the normal house sounds, the distant hum of the fridge, the gentle tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall, the wind outside, from anything that might signal an intrusion. Fear is exhausting. It drains you, wrings you out until you're just a hollow shell vibrating with terror. I wanted to sleep, desperately, but the thought of closing my eyes felt like signing my own death warrant. I hadn't moved from the couch in what felt like ages. My body was stiff, my muscles protesting, but the fear held me immobile. I kept replaying the image of the photo in my mind, the plain listing, the chilling description. For the lonely soul at home. It was meant for me. It had to be. The photo was proof. Then I heard it. It wasn't the wind, or the house settling, or a car passing. It was a distinct sound from upstairs. A single, soft creak of a floorboard. My blood ran cold again, if that was even possible. My heart, which had finally started to slow its frantic pace, lurched back into a wild gallop. I wasn't upstairs. I hadn't been upstairs since before I went down the rabbit hole of the dark web. My parents weren't home. Someone was in the house. My first instinct was to scream, to bolt, to do something. But I was frozen. The sound was followed by silence. Absolute, heavy silence that felt like it was listening. Was I just imagining it? My mind was playing tricks on me, right? The paranoia was getting the better of me. Then another creak. closer to the stairs this time. Slow, deliberate, not my imagination. They were upstairs, moving towards the stairs. Panic seized me, raw and visceral. Every nerve ending screamed at me to run, to hide. Where? There was nowhere truly safe. The house was big, but felt small and exposed now. I scrambled off the couch, my movements clumsy and loud in the terrifying silence. I had to be quiet. I had to hide. The basement. Maybe the basement? It was dark, full of storage boxes. Maybe I could disappear down there. Keeping low, I crept towards the kitchen, aiming for the basement door. Every footstep I took seemed to echo through the house. I held my breath, listening. Were they on the stairs yet? Could they hear me? Another sound. A soft bump, like something brushing against the wall near the top of the stairs. They were coming down. I froze behind the kitchen island, peering towards the hallway that led to the stairs. The lights I had turned on earlier now felt like spotlights, highlighting my vulnerable position. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed softly. 3 a.m. The sound was a shocking intrusion in the tense silence, making me jump. And then I saw it. A shadow at the edge of the hallway, where the stairs met the first floor. It wasn't just a shadow, it was too solid, too defined. It moved, slowly, deliberately, into the hall. It wasn't a person. Not in the conventional sense. It was fluid, shifting, darker than the shadows around it. It seemed to absorb the light from the overhead fixture in the hall. It didn't walk, it flowed, gliding along the floor, its form indistinct, like a living void. It was roughly the size and shape of a person, but without any features, just a rippling, inky blackness. My blood turned to ice. My breath hitched in my throat, and I had to clamp a hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. This wasn't a burglar. This wasn't a stalker. This was something else entirely. Something that felt like it had crawled out of the deepest, darkest corners of the internet, summoned by that listing. The companion. It glided into the living room, moving with unnatural silence. It didn't seem to be looking around in a human way. It just moved. Towards the couch where I had been sitting just moments before. It reached the couch and paused. It seemed to hover there for a moment, its amorphous form slightly taller now, as if observing the empty space. Was it looking for me? Could it sense me? I pressed myself further behind the kitchen island, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. My heart was a drum solo in my chest, and I was terrified it was loud enough to be heard. The shadow thing then turned, its form rippling, and started to glide slowly around the living room. It moved towards the windows, towards the places I had peeked through the blinds earlier. It wasn't random, it seemed to be methodically checking the room. It reached the bay window, the one I had first looked out of. It stopped there for a long moment. I could swear I felt a coldness emanating from it, even from across the room. It felt hungry. Not for food, but for something else. Presence? Life? Companionship? The horror of that word, companionship, on the dark web listing now took on a whole new, grotesque meaning. This wasn't a person offering comfort. This was this thing. And it was here because I was the lonely soul at home. It had come to fulfill the service. It slowly moved away from the window, continuing its silent circuit of the room. It was coming closer to the kitchen, closer to where I was hiding. I knew I couldn't stay there. It was going to find me. I had to move. Adrenaline, pure, blinding terror, finally kicked in. Forget the basement. Too far, too slow. The back door. It was closer. If I could just get out, get to the street, run to the neighbors. Timing was everything. I watched the inky form glide towards the far side of the living room. When its back was to me, or as much of a back as it had, I bolted. I sprinted from behind the island, across the kitchen floor, towards the back door. My movements were clumsy and loud. A plate slipped from the counter and shattered on the floor. The sound was deafening. The shadow thing stopped its movement instantly. Its form seemed to snap, rippling violently, and it turned towards the sound. Towards me. It moved fast now. Faster than it had before, gliding across the floor with terrifying speed. It wasn't running, it was flowing, like liquid darkness. I fumbled with the deadbolt on the back door, my hand shaking uncontrollably. The metal was cold under my fingers. The bolt resisted, seemed stuck for a horrifying second. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The shadow thing was halfway across the kitchen. It seemed taller now, its form stretching upwards, reaching. Finally, the deadbolt clicked open. I wrenched the door open and burst out into the cool night air, slamming the door shut behind me. I didn't stop to look back. I didn't care if it was locked or not. I just ran. Ran across the small deck, down the steps, across the yard, scrambling over the low fence into the neighbor's property. I ran towards the street, towards the lights, towards safety. I didn't dare look back at the house. At my house. Where the shadow thing was. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached, until I reached the blessed light of a streetlight and the relative safety of the street. I kept running until I was halfway down the block, gasping for air, my heart still trying to beat its way out of my chest. I stopped and finally, hesitantly, looked back. My house stood there, dark except for the lights I had left blazing in the living room. It looked normal, quiet, innocent, but I knew better. I stood there for a long time, shaking, watching the house, half expecting to see the inky form appear in a window or glide out the front door. But nothing happened. The house remained silent, still, holding its secrets within. I didn't go back inside that night. I ended up banging on a neighbor's door, weaving a frantic story about hearing noises and getting scared. They were kind enough to let me stay until morning, though they looked at me like I was crazy. When my parents came back the next day, I didn't tell them the full truth. I couldn't. How could I explain the dark web, the listing, the photo, the shadow thing? They would never understand. They would blame the internet, blame my curiosity, blame me. I deleted the Tor browser from my laptop, wiped the files. I tried to erase every trace of my foray into that hidden world. But I can't erase what I saw, what I experienced. The house feels different now. It's still my home, but it's tainted. Every shadow seems deeper, every sound more significant. I still sleep there, but I rarely feel truly alone. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and dark, I think I hear a soft creak from upstairs. Or I catch a fleeting glimpse of something darker than darkness at the edge of my vision. The listing is probably still out there. The companionship service for the lonely soul at home. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that I am no longer the lonely soul. I have a companion now, and it's waiting.